High school can be brutal, especially when you're different. For me, being different meant being openly gay in a place that thrived on making anyone who stood out feel small. I knew the risks of coming out, but I wasn't prepared for how relentless it would be. The kids at my school weren't just cruel, they thrived on it. Like vultures, they descended at any sign of weakness. At the top of the food chain was Andy, a senior who saw me as his personal target. Every day was a new form of torture, mocking comments, cruel pranks, endless humiliation. Andy made sure I never forgot how much he despised me. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my education as my escape route. I couldn't let him break me. My mom had sacrificed too much. My mom, my rock, had raised me on her own. She was still a teenager when I was born, and her parents kicked her out for getting pregnant. My dad? He walked away before I took my first breath. It had always been just the two of us, and she worked tirelessly to provide for me. I admired her strength and never let anyone disrespect her, until one day Andy crossed the line. He'd been on me all day, making his usual snide remarks, but it escalated in the hallway. His girlfriend, Penny, laughed along as he made cracks about my clothes and my family. I gritted my teeth and walked away, as I always did, until Andy made the fatal mistake of insulting my mom. My hard-working, loving, selfless mom. Something inside me snapped. I turned and swung my fist with everything I had. Andy was stunned for a moment before charging at me. A crowd had gathered, and I was outmatched. Andy was bigger, stronger, and far more experienced at fighting. I braced for the worst. But before he could land a blow, someone pulled him off me. When I looked up, I saw Luca. He wasn't just anyone. He was the new guy at school and my biggest crush. After that day, everything felt surreal. Luca standing up for me was something I never expected. People like him didn't usually get involved with people like me, not in my world. Yet there he was, walking beside me as if it were the most normal thing in the world. By lunch, the shock hadn't worn off. When he waved me over to his table, I hesitated, sure it was some kind of mistake. But he smiled at me, and it was the kind of smile that made you feel like everything was going to be okay. I joined him and a group of kids I recognized but didn't know well. They weren't popular, but they weren't outcasts either. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was part of something, even if I didn't entirely believe I belonged there. Over the next few days, I noticed something strange. Andy kept his distance. He still glared at me when we passed in the hallway, but he didn't say anything. His usual taunts and insults were gone, and I realized it was because of Luca. Andy had finally met someone who wasn't afraid of him. Luca, on the other hand, was around all the time. He made an effort to talk to me, to include me in things, and for once, school didn't feel like a battlefield. I wasn't sure why he had taken an interest in me, but I wasn't going to question it. Spending time with him was the highlight of my day. He was different from anyone I'd ever met, confident but not arrogant, kind but not overly sentimental. He had this way of making me feel seen, like I wasn't just a punchline or a target. I found myself opening up to him in ways I never had with anyone else. As the days turned into weeks, my crush on him grew stronger. It was impossible not to like him. He was smart, funny, and thoughtful, the kind of person who could light up a room just by walking into it. But I kept my feelings to myself. I'd learned long ago not to hope for things that were out of reach, and Luca was definitely out of my league. Then, one afternoon, something changed. We were hanging out in his room, a place that had quickly become my favorite escape from the chaos of school. I didn't know how we got onto the topic, but suddenly he mentioned that he wasn't interested in girls. The words hit me like a bolt of lightning. I didn't know how to process them. He was the kind of person everyone assumed was straight, handsome, popular, effortlessly cool. But he wasn't. He liked guys. That revelation sparked something in me, a tiny flicker of hope I hadn't felt in a long time. But just as quickly as it appeared, I pushed it down. Luca could like guys, but that didn't mean he could like me. I was too plain, too inexperienced, too Everything he probably didn't want. Still, I couldn't help feeling a shift in the way I saw him. Every small moment between us felt more charged, every touch, every glance. It was hard not to read into things, to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he saw me the way I saw him. One day, as we sat together listening to music, he leaned over and kissed me. It was my first kiss, and I was so stunned that for a moment I didn't even react. But then something clicked, and I kissed him back. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a door opening to a part of me I'd kept locked away for so long. For the first time, I felt wanted. I felt like I mattered. Afterward, Luca brushed it off like it was no big deal, but to me, it was everything. I couldn't stop thinking about it, replaying the moment over and over in my head. I didn't know what it meant to him, but to me, it meant everything. As we spent more time together, things started to shift at school. People noticed that Luca and I were close, and it made them think twice about messing with me. His presence was like a shield, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was constantly under attack. But with every passing day, my feelings for him grew stronger, and so did my fear of ruining everything. What if he didn't feel the same way? What if the kiss didn't mean what I thought it did? I tried to convince myself that being his friend was enough, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something had to give, but I didn't know if I was ready to take that leap. The more time I spent with Luca, the harder it became to ignore how I felt. He wasn't just my friend or the person who had stood up for me when no one else did. He was someone I cared about deeply. The kiss we shared played on a loop in my mind, and while I told myself not to read too much into it, I couldn't help but hope. I kept my feelings bottled up for weeks. Every time we hung out, every time he smiled at me or brushed his hand against mine, I wanted to say something, but fear held me back. What if he didn't feel the same way? What if I ruined everything? Then, one night, my mom unknowingly gave me the push I needed. She had always been my biggest supporter, my constant source of love and acceptance. When I told her about Luca, I let it slip that he had kissed me. Her reaction was immediate: excitement, encouragement, and a gentle reminder that I deserved to be happy. "You told me to take a chance on love," she said. "Why can't you take your own advice?" Her words stuck with me, and the next morning I decided it was time. I couldn't keep hiding how I felt. I had to know if Luca saw me the way I saw him. We were standing by the lockers before class when I worked up the courage to ask him out. My heart was pounding, my palms were sweaty, and I was sure my voice would betray me. But I said the words anyway, blurting them out so quickly that he didn't even understand at first. When I repeated myself, slower this time, his face lit up with a smile I'll never forget. "Of course," he said. "I'd love to go out with you." I could hardly believe it. I had spent so much time convincing myself that this moment was impossible, and now it was real. That Saturday we went on our first date. It wasn't anything fancy, just dinner at a small restaurant that was quiet enough for us to talk without distractions. The conversation flowed effortlessly, just like it always did with Luca, but this time there was something different. There was a spark, a connection I had only dreamed of before. He had a way of making me feel completely at ease while also leaving me flustered in the best way. Every time he complimented me or leaned in a little closer, I felt like I was floating. By the end of the night, I didn't want it to end. As we finished our meal, he surprised me again. He asked if I would be his boyfriend. My answer was immediate: yes. When he kissed me in the quiet of his car afterward, it felt like the world had stopped. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just someone people tolerated or mocked. I was someone worth loving. Our relationship didn't stay a secret for long. By Monday, everyone at school knew we were together. We didn't hide it. We held hands, walked to class together, and kissed in the hallways. The reactions were mixed, as I expected. Some people were supportive, others stared, and a few whispered behind our back. But none of it mattered because for the first time in my life, I was happy. Luca gave me the confidence to be myself in ways I hadn't thought possible. His presence silenced the voices that had always told me I wasn't enough. Of course, not everyone was thrilled about us. Andy was still lurking in the background, his resentment simmering just below the surface. One day, as Luca and I walked to PE, Andy stepped in front of us, blocking our path. He looked at us with that familiar sneer, but there was something new in his eyes: bitterness. "Well, if it isn't the school's hottest couple," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. I was used to his insults, but something about his tone made my stomach twist. Luca squeezed my hand, a silent reassurance, but I didn't want him to fight my battles for me this time. "Leave us alone, Andy," I said, keeping my voice steady. He laughed, stepping closer. "Or what? Just because you've got your little boyfriend now, doesn't mean you're not worthless." His words stung, but they didn't break me. Not this time. I looked him in the eye and said, "I don't care what you think. At least I have someone who loves me. Can you say the same?" Andy's smirk faltered for just a moment, but it was enough. He muttered something under his breath and walked away. I stood there, my heart racing, trying to process what had just happened. I had stood up to Andy. For the first time, I had defended myself without anyone else stepping in. Luca leaned over and kissed me on the cheek, his pride in me shining brighter than the sun. "You're amazing," he said simply, and we walked to PE together, hand in hand. That moment stayed with me. It wasn't just about standing up to Andy, it was about standing up for myself. And it was because of Luca that I found the courage to do it. Life didn't magically become perfect after that day, but it felt like the pieces were finally starting to fall into place. Luca and I became inseparable, and the world that once seemed so dark suddenly felt brighter. At school, people adjusted to seeing us together. Some kids whispered, others stared, but most eventually moved on. Even Andy kept his distance, though his glares reminded me he hadn't completely let go of his resentment. It didn't matter, though. His opinion didn't define me anymore. Luca brought so much joy into my life. We'd spend hours talking, laughing, and dreaming about the future. Being with him wasn't just about romance. It was about feeling understood, valued, and supported in a way I never had before. At home, my mom welcomed Luca like he was already part of the family. She would tease me about him, calling him my knight in shining armor, and every time it made me laugh. She was thrilled to see me happy, and for once I allowed myself to truly believe I deserved it. Our relationship became a symbol of strength for me. Holding hands in the hallway, laughing over lunch, or even sharing a kiss in public, all these small acts felt like victories. They reminded me that I didn't have to hide anymore, that love could exist even in places where it seemed impossible. Most importantly, Luca taught me how to believe in myself. His love gave me the courage to face the world head-on, to be proud of who I was. With him by my side, I finally understood what it meant to be truly happy.